For 22 years, my identity was a business card. It was a neat, embossed rectangle of cardstock that said my name, and underneath it, Director of Strategic Analysis, North American Division. It was a title that felt solid, respectable, permanent. It was my passport to a life I had meticulously built. A spacious home in a good school district, a wife who was the anchor of our family, 2 kids on a smooth glide path to college, and a future that felt as predictable and secure as the quarterly earnings reports I was paid to produce. I wasn't just an employee, I was a pillar of the corporation. My world was one of data, of trend lines, of carefully calculated projections. My team and I were the company's navigators, using our collective experience and intuition to steer the massive ship through the choppy waters of the market. I believed in experience. I believed in the human element, the gut feeling that comes from staring at spreadsheets for 2 decades, the nuanced understanding that can't be quantified. I was proud of my work, proud of the stable income it provided, and confident in the robust safety net it afforded us. A great health insurance plan, a healthy 401k, a portfolio of sensible stock market investments. My entire life was a testament to the power of a good plan and diligent risk management. I was a man who had done everything right. The first signs of the shift were subtle, couched in the kind of corporate jargon designed to sound revolutionary while saying nothing at all. There were memos about synergizing our digital assets and leveraging next-generation analytics for enhanced operational efficiency. A new vice president of innovation was hired, a man half my age who wore expensive sneakers with his suit and spoke in TED Talk aphorisms. He talked about disruption and agility. To me, it just sounded like noise. I'd seen these corporate seasons come and go. I'd weathered 3 different rebranding campaigns and 4 different CEOs, each with their own pet projects and buzzwords. My department and I were the engine room, constant and essential no matter who was on the bridge. Then came the whispers of Odyssey. It was the code name for a new, proprietary AI platform the company was developing. It was supposed to be a tool, they said, something to augment our decision-making capabilities. I attended the early demos. I watched the slick presentations where the algorithm processed petabytes of data in seconds, spitting out forecasts and market analyses with a speed that was admittedly impressive. But I saw it as a powerful calculator, not a replacement. An algorithm couldn't understand nuance, I told my team. It couldn't account for a sudden shift in consumer sentiment or a geopolitical event. It had no gut. It had no experience. It was a tool, and we were the craftsmen who would wield it. I was so wrong. The meeting was on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't on my calendar. Just a summons from the new VP's assistant. When I walked into the sterile, glass-walled conference room, an HR representative was already sitting at the table, a thin, professional smile on her face. That's when I knew. The VP didn't waste time with pleasantries. He spoke with the passionless clarity of a man delivering a weather report. He talked about the success of the Odyssey project, about its 97.3% accuracy rate in forecasting, about the millions it would save the company in operational overhead. He explained that the entire function of my department, the human analysis, the strategic forecasting, was now considered a legacy system, a redundancy. They weren't firing me because I had failed. They were eliminating my job because I had succeeded in a way that could now be replicated, scaled, and done cheaper by a machine. My 22 years of experience, my intuition, my gut, had just been rendered obsolete by a block of code. I don't remember much of what was said after that. Words like severance, outplacement services, and transition floated past me like debris in a flood. I just nodded, a strange, disconnected calm settling over me. I walked back to my office, the same office I had been so proud to get, and started packing my things into a small cardboard box. The photos of my wife and kids, a coffee mug my daughter had painted for me, a stupid little trophy I'd won in a corporate golf tournament. 22 years, and it all fit into a single, pathetic box. As I walked through the office, past the desks of the people I had hired and mentored, no one would meet my eye. They knew. The algorithm wasn't just replacing me. It was a shadow hanging over all of them. I was just the first. I got home at 11 in the morning. My wife was in the kitchen unloading groceries. The sight of me standing in the doorway in my suit holding a cardboard box stopped her cold. The bag of apples slipped from her hand and thudded onto the floor, scattering across the gleaming hardwood. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I tried to explain it, but the sentence "I was replaced by a computer" sounded insane. It felt like a line from a bad movie, not the reality of our well-ordered lives. I saw the look on her face. It was fear, of course, but underneath it there was something else. A flicker of confusion, of disbelief that the man she had relied on for so long, the unwavering pillar of their life, could be so easily deleted. In that moment, standing in the bright, sunny kitchen of the house his job had paid for, he understood that the algorithm hadn't just terminated his employment. It had fired a kill shot at the very foundation of his identity, and the shockwave was about to bring his entire world crashing down. The first week of my unemployment was a strange, disorienting performance of normalcy. We called it a sabbatical, a well-deserved break. I told my wife and myself that this was an opportunity. A chance to find a better, more fulfilling role, a company that would truly value my experience. My severance package was generous enough to provide a comfortable buffer, a financial cushion that allowed us to maintain the illusion that we were on a planned vacation from reality. I fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. I power washed the deck. I organized the garage. I filled my days with the mundane tasks I'd never had time for, a frantic, busy work attempt to prove I was still useful. But an undercurrent of dread ran beneath every chore. The house, usually a sanctuary, began to feel like a cage. My wife tried to be supportive. She would make optimistic comments about new possibilities and tell me not to rush into anything. But I could feel her anxiety radiating off her in waves. It was in the way she would subtly steer the shopping cart away from the organic section at the grocery store, the way she would linger a little too long looking at the price of a bottle of wine before putting it back on the shelf. Our carefully planned family budget, once a roadmap to a comfortable future, was now a ticking clock. After a few weeks of this charade, I dove into the job hunt. I spent days polishing my resume, translating my 22 years of loyalty and experience into a series of dynamic bullet points. I felt a surge of my old confidence. I was a seasoned executive, a proven leader. Finding a new position would be a challenge, of course, but not an insurmountable one. I started networking, reaching out to old colleagues and contacts. The conversations were always friendly, full of sympathy, but they ended with the same vague promises to keep an ear out. I soon realized I was speaking a different language. They were all talking about machine learning, data science, AI integration. I was a man fluent in Latin trying to find a job in a world that now spoke Python. The rejections started as a trickle, then became a flood. Most were automated, impersonal emails from no-reply addresses. "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates whose qualifications more closely match our needs." The translation was clear. You are too old. Your skills are outdated. You are an analog man in a digital world. With each rejection, a piece of my self-worth chipped away. The confident man who had left that office building with his head held high was being systematically dismantled by 1,000 tiny cuts. I became withdrawn, sullen. My days were spent in my home office, not strategizing or leading, but endlessly scrolling through job boards, the blue light of the monitor painting my face in a pale, ghostly glow. The severance money began to dwindle. The buffer was gone. Now we were running on fumes, dipping into the savings we had earmarked for the kids' college and our retirement. The tension in the house became thick and suffocating. Our conversations, once easy and familiar, were now minefields of unspoken resentments. My wife's supportive facade began to crack under the strain. "Did you follow up on that lead my brother gave you?" she'd ask, her tone a little too sharp. "Maybe you need to be more aggressive, less picky." She didn't understand. It wasn't about being picky. It was about being wanted, and nobody wanted me. The fights began ugly and circular. She would accuse me of not trying hard enough, of wallowing in self-pity. I would lash out, accusing her of not understanding the humiliation, the profound sense of being erased. "I gave everything to that company," I yelled one night, my voice raw with a grief I couldn't articulate. "I sacrificed time with you with the kids for that job, and for what? To be thrown on the scrap heap because a machine can do it faster. I sacrificed too," she shot back, her own pain and fear finally boiling over. "I built my life around your career. I managed this house, I raised these children, I supported you. And now what am I supposed to do? Watch it all fall apart because you've given up?" Our marriage had been a partnership built on a shared dream of a stable, secure future. But the future was no longer stable, and the dream was turning into a nightmare. She had married a provider, a man with a clear trajectory. Now she was shackled to an anchor, a man whose career path had abruptly ended in a brick wall. The final blow came quietly, without a shouting match. She had started spending more time with a certain group of friends, including a recently divorced man from our neighborhood, an old friend. He was a successful real estate developer, a man whose work was tangible, built of brick and mortar, immune to the whims of algorithms. He was everything I was no longer. One evening, she sat me down at the kitchen table. She didn't look at me. She just stared at her hands, folded neatly in front of her. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The kids and I are going to stay with my sister for a while. I need space. I need to be around someone who is moving forward." The words "someone who is moving forward" hung in the air between us, an indictment and an epitaph for our marriage. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. I just felt a profound, chilling emptiness. I had thought losing my job was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. I came home a few days later from another fruitless trip to a networking event to find the house unnaturally quiet. Her car was gone. On the bed on her side was a note and a neatly folded set of divorce papers. I had been made redundant twice. First by a machine that took my past, and then by a woman who took my future. I was alone, in a house I could no longer afford, with no job and no purpose. I was an obsolete man. The silence that descended upon the house after they left was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that amplified the sound of my own breathing, the frantic beating of my own heart. I wandered from room to room, each one a perfectly preserved diorama of a life that was no longer mine. The indentation on the sofa where my wife always sat, the faint smell of my daughter's perfume in her empty room, the half-finished model airplane on my son's desk. They were all ghosts, torturing me with the memory of what I'd lost. The foreclosure notice arrived about a month later. It wasn't a surprise. I had stopped paying the mortgage, not out of defiance, but out of a complete and utter paralysis. The official-looking document, taped to the front door I had once been so proud of, felt less like a threat and more like a logical conclusion. Of course, I was losing the house. I had lost everything else. The process of leaving was a slow, agonizing funeral for my old life. I sorted through 20 years of memories, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to throw away. Each object was a fresh stab of pain. I held my wife's favorite coffee mug and could almost hear her laughing in the kitchen. I found a box of my kids' old report cards and was crushed by the weight of a future I had failed to secure for them. I sold the nice furniture, the big screen TV, the second car. I was liquidating my identity for cash. I ended up in a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, in a sprawling, anonymous complex where the walls were paper-thin and the view from my window was a parking lot. My world had shrunk from a sprawling suburban dream to a drab, beige box. This was the bottom. For a long time, I did nothing. My days were a gray, featureless landscape of despair. I stopped looking for jobs. I stopped answering the phone. I lived on cheap takeout and slept for 12 hours at a time because sleep was the only escape from the relentless, looping monologue of my own failure. Who was I if not a director, a husband, a father? I was a null set, a void. My depression was a physical weight, pinning me to the cheap sofa, making the simplest tasks, like taking a shower or making a cup of coffee, feel like climbing a mountain. I was a man in freefall, and I had forgotten how to even try to open the parachute. The turning point was not a grand epiphany. It was a clogged drain. The kitchen sink backed up, filling with greasy, foul-smelling water. My first instinct was to call the building's superintendent, the way I would have called a handyman in my old life. But I was paralyzed by a strange mixture of shame and apathy. I couldn't even face a stranger, so I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I opened the cabinet under the sink, pushed aside the cleaning supplies, and stared at the mess of pipes. Driven by a flicker of some long-dormant self-reliance, I went to the hardware store. The place was an alien landscape of tools and materials I didn't understand. I felt as out of place as I did on LinkedIn. I bought a cheap wrench and a bottle of drain cleaner. Back in my apartment, I spent an hour on my hands and knees, fighting with a rusty bolt, getting filthy water all over the floor. It was frustrating, messy, and deeply humbling. But when I finally managed to clear the clog, when I turned on the faucet and watched the water swirl away with a satisfying gurgle, I felt a strange and unfamiliar sensation. It was a tiny, microscopic flicker of accomplishment. I hadn't managed a team or analyzed a market trend. I had fixed a pipe. It was a real, tangible problem, and I had solved it with my own two hands. That small victory was a crack in the armor of my depression. The next day, instead of staring at the walls, I went for a walk. I had nowhere to go, so I just walked. I walked through neighborhoods I'd only ever driven through, past parks and small businesses and schools. For the first time in months, I was looking at the world around me, not at a screen. I saw people living their lives, lives that didn't revolve around corporate ladders or digital transformation. I saw a baker frosting a cake, a mechanic working on an engine, a tailor hemming a pair of pants. They were working with their hands, creating, fixing, building. There was an honesty to their labor that felt a million miles away from the abstract, digital world that had cast me out. One afternoon, my walk took me past a community garden, a small, vibrant patch of green tucked between two old brick buildings. I saw people of all ages kneeling in the dirt, tending to their plants. On a whim, I walked in. The air smelled of earth and growing things. An older woman with a kind, wrinkled face and dirt under her fingernails looked up and smiled at me. "First time?" she asked. I nodded, feeling awkward and out of place. "We can always use an extra pair of hands for weeding," she said, pointing to a patch of overgrown tomato plants. I hesitated. I was a former director of strategic analysis. I wore suits. I didn't pull weeds. But then I looked at my hands, soft and useless. And I thought, why not? I knelt down in the dirt, the damp soil cool against my knees, and I started to pull. The work was mindless, repetitive, and strangely peaceful. For the next hour, I wasn't an obsolete man. I was just a pair of hands in a garden, separating the weeds from the things that were meant to grow. It was the most useful I had felt in a year. That first afternoon in the garden turned into a routine. I started going every day. At first, it was just to have somewhere to be, a way to escape the four walls of my apartment. But soon it became something more. The older woman, whose name was Maria, took me under her wing. She taught me how to tell the difference between a weed and a seedling, how to prepare the soil, how to stake a tomato plant. She spoke about gardening with a quiet, profound wisdom. "You can't rush things here," she told me one day as I was impatiently trying to force a seed into the hard soil. "You have to understand the system. The sun, the water, the earth. You give it what it needs, and then you have to be patient and trust the process." It was the most profound piece of management advice I had ever received. The work was hard. My back ached. My office-soft hands became calloused and stained with dirt. But with every weed I pulled, with every seed I planted, I felt like I was pulling the weeds out of my own soul, planting the seeds of a new purpose. I wasn't analyzing growth. I was creating it. The satisfaction was deep and real. I saw the direct result of my labor in the green shoots that pushed their way through the soil. There was no algorithm, no quarterly report, just the simple, honest cycle of effort and reward. The garden was a community. I got to know the other volunteers, a retired schoolteacher, a young art student, a single dad who brought his kids on the weekends. They didn't know or care about my past. They didn't know me as a failed executive. They just knew me as the quiet guy who was surprisingly good at building trellises. My analytical mind, it turned out, was great at planning garden layouts and maximizing sun exposure. For the first time in a long time, my skills felt useful again. One day, the garden was selling its surplus produce at a small stand on the sidewalk. I volunteered to help. As I stood there, selling a bag of fresh-picked tomatoes to a smiling customer, I realized I was engaged in the most fundamental form of commerce. I had helped grow this food from the earth with my own hands, and now someone was giving me money for it. The few dollars I put in the cash box felt more valuable than any five-figure bonus I had ever received. It was real. It was tangible. I started to rebuild my life, not from the top down, but from the ground up. I got a part-time job at a local nursery, hauling bags of mulch and advising customers on pest control. The pay was a fraction of my old salary, but it was enough to pay my rent and buy my groceries. My life was small, but it was stable. It was mine. After many months, I finally got the courage to reach out to my kids. I didn't call to rehash the past or make empty promises. I sent them a picture of a massive pumpkin I had grown in the garden. I invited them to come see it. When they came, they were hesitant at first. They saw my small apartment, my dirty fingernails, my simple life. It was a world away from the life they had known with me. But then I took them to the garden. I showed them the plants I was tending. I let them dig their hands into the soil. I saw a different kind of connection being forged, one not based on the things I could provide them, but on something I could share with them. They saw a father who was no longer broken and lost, but was quiet, focused, and for the first time in a long time, genuinely content. My old life feels like a story about someone else now. I don't have a prestigious title or a big house. My investments are no longer in the stock market, but in the rich, dark soil of a community garden. I learned that my worth is not determined by a job title or a corporate algorithm. It's measured in the things I can grow, the things I can fix, the small, positive impact I can have on the world around me. The algorithm decided I was obsolete. It was wrong. It just took losing everything to realize that my most valuable functions couldn't be coded. They had to be grown. Thanks for staying with me. I want to try something fun. Comment your country down below, and let's see how many places around the world are connected here. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more.